Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're watching us from. It gives us a great pleasure in welcoming you to the very first NICE International Women's Summit. Thank you all for joining us here today. The live version of this particular webinar is also streaming on our YouTube channel, NICE Nepal. NICE International Women's Summit 2020 is our humble effort to bring together the dynamic women expert in the field of international relation from different parts of the world, wherein they share their ideas and expertise for better and meaningful future engagements. Our aim is also to reflect the fact that there are enough excellent women experts in the field of international. This is the first Women's Summit organized by NICE within a very short span of time. And we are delighted to have around 71 experts from 12 countries. Over this entire 10 sessions, we will have presenters from Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, United States, UK, Russia, Armenia, the Philippines, Switzerland, and Indonesia. The session will be taking place in 2 Zoom rooms simultaneously. This is the second session of the summit, and we are pleased to introduce Dr. Reena Marwah as our moderator throughout this 2-hour-long session. Dr. Reena Marwah is a Secretary General of Association of Asia Scholars and an Associate Professor at Jesus and Mary College, Delhi University. She has a PhD in International Business. She was the Senior Fellow at Indian Council of Social Science Research. Dr. Marwah is the recipient of the Robert McNamara Fellowship of the World Bank and the Asia Fellowship of the Asian Scholarship Foundation. She has also published numerous books, and the most recent being Reimagining India-Thailand Relation, a multilateral and bilateral perspective. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Marwah to moderate this session. Ma'am, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunena, and I'm very grateful to and to Dr. Pramod for taking wonderful initiative of bringing women together to discuss to largely a domain that has been captured by men. So it's really very important, to have women speakers also engaging in important issues of international significance. And we are delighted to begin with this second session for today. This session is going to focus on various subjects. In fact, a lot of it which has been recently in the news. Including India, and speak about the Rohingya crisis. Again, and which concerns India as well as South Asian and Southeast Asian countries, the role of media in India-Nepal relations, sub-regionalism, India-EU partnership, and then we're also going to look at issues of the geostrategic significance of Central Asia. So we are delighted to welcome our first speaker for session 2, that is India-ASEAN, the recent trends. And our speaker for today is Dr. Sampa Kundu. She is assistant professor at Amity University in India. And so Sampa, may I request you to please begin with your presentation?
Sure, ma'am. So good morning to all of you, and very heartfelt thanks to NICE Nepal, Dr. Pramod and his excellent team for giving us this opportunity to present our views. So I begin my presentation. So as all of you can see that my topic would be ASEAN India, the recent trends. Can I have the next slide, please?
Sampa, you have 10 minutes. I hope you're aware. Yeah.
Okay. Ma'am, actually, I was just waiting for the next slide. Okay, all right.
Why don't you start? Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to cover 2 very specific aspects on this topic. The first one is identification of the concerns that ASEAN particularly has as a regional grouping. And the second one would be what can India offer to ASEAN as a partner nation? So why I have chosen these two particular topics is, when we talk about India-ASEAN relations, or when we talk about opportunities and challenges in India-ASEAN relations, we most of the time talk about an Indian perspective. Being in India, we mostly talk about an Indian perspective. But it is also very important to look at what ASEAN needs. So a very significant portion of my presentation will cover what ASEAN needs from India. So it is important to identify the concerns of ASEAN where India can offer itself, or where India can offer, some of the some of the positivity to ASEAN as a neighbor, as a neighboring country. So if I can have the next slide, I will be, yeah, thank you. So this slide will talk about the ambitions of the ASEAN countries. So if we have a closer look at this particular slide, you will see that Indonesia as a country has published a vision of Indonesia for 2000, for the year 2045, and this particular report was published in the year 2019. So in this report, Indonesia mentioned that it would like to become one of the world's largest 5 economies by the year 2045. Similarly, if we look at the other nations from ASEAN, for example, Myanmar. So Myanmar has various problems, as we all know. So for Myanmar, the most important ambitions that I could look for was Myanmar would like to become a pluralist country and also a prosperous nation. And this particular ambition was stated by the Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan 2018 to 2038. And this particular report was published in the year 2018. So if I can now quickly go to the vision of Singapore. So the vision of Singapore is Singapore wants to emerge as a smart nation which will be powered by digital innovation. So smart nation, digital innovation are primary objectives of Singapore in its way of becoming one of the global powers, one of the it is already a developed nation. It is already considered to be one of the most successful economy in Southeast Asia. So next country that I would like to refer to is Vietnam. So for Vietnam, it is Vietnam would like to become one of the one second, if I can just go, yeah, thank you. So Vietnam would like to become one of the top 3 industrial nations in ASEAN. For Malaysia, it is like it would like to become one of the developed economy by the year 2020. And this was reinstated by the 11th Malaysia Plan in the year 2015. For Philippines, it would like to become a poverty-free nation by the year 2040. So if we look at all these things, all these issues, we would understand that these issues, these concepts, and these ideas actually identify the concerns of the ASEAN nations. For the convenience of time and for the paucity of time, basically, I did not look at the rest of the 4 nations. So just these 6 important, very important strategic partners from ASEAN, these ambitions will tell you that what ASEAN countries need or what are the concerns of the ASEAN countries. So now if I can quickly come to the next slide, it will tell you that in this month and in June 2020, ASEAN Summit happened. A virtual ASEAN Summit happened. It was supposed to be conducted in the month of April, but in April, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it did not happen. So finally, on 26th June, the 36th ASEAN Summit happened on virtually. So in this summit, since Vietnam is the chair of ASEAN now, so the Vietnamese Prime Minister, Mr. Nguyen Xuan Phuc, he mentioned that while the entire world is stretched thin in the fight against pandemic, irresponsible acts and acts in violation of international law are still taking place, affecting the environment of security and stability in certain regions, including in our region. So from this statement, we would understand that Vietnamese Prime Minister is basically talking about one very serious concern facing ASEAN, and that is the South China Sea issue. So apart from the individual nation-centric perspective, we would also like to have an overview about the concerns facing ASEAN as a region, and the South China Sea disputes is one of them. Now, if I can quickly come to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So in this slide, I talked about the ASEAN senior officials virtual meeting that happened just 2 days back in July 2020. And in this virtual summit, again, the ASEAN senior officials did talk about an ASEAN fund to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. They also talked about, and this is very important, they also talked about convergence of Mekong sub-regional cooperation with ASEAN goals. So they are actually talking about narrowing the developmental gaps between the Mekong sub-regional countries and the ASEAN other, the five quote unquote the stronger nations from ASEAN. So this is very important. How to converge the goals of ASEAN and how to narrow down the developmental gaps between CLMV countries and the ASEAN 5. And then they have also hoped that they will be forming the next action plans with all of their dialogue partners, including India, US, Canada, China, New Zealand, South Korea, Russia, and United Nations. So here from this slide, we would understand that the another motto, another concern for ASEAN is building ASEAN community. So ASEAN community building exercise is very important for ASEAN, where India can support ASEAN. And then particularly, if we can just quickly go through these three slides, here I'm talking about what ASEAN needs as a regional organization, and also what ASEAN needs from the governmental perspective, from the domestic governmental perspective, national goals. So digital transformation, transparency, effective governance, and government are need of the hour for ASEAN. And next, please. Yeah. So again, regional integration, synergies and coordination, and continued work with the neighbors and partners. And this particular slide is very important when we are talking about India's partnership with ASEAN. And now I'm going to talk about how India can help ASEAN. And please, next slide. Yeah. So when it comes to India, we all know that India has already taken this vast Indo-Pacific approach. Indian Prime Minister has already spoken about an Indian Ocean Initiative. So what would be that Indian Ocean Initiative or India's Indo-Pacific approach? I'm not going to talk about Quad and all because we all know about that. But apart from Quad, what India can do? So India has few tools and few methods which India can approach, which New Delhi can approach or apply to enhance its relationships with the ASEAN countries while ASEAN is trying to achieve its own goals. So the connectivity projects, particularly the maritime connectivity, would be very important. Next is India should continue supporting the CLMV countries, which are Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. Myanmar is especially important because Myanmar is the single most ASEAN country that shares both land boundary and the maritime boundary with India. And then, of course, we all know about India's ACTIS policy. Within India's ACTIS policy, I feel that India should strengthen its bond with BIMSTEC. India should also work on MGC, and India-ASEAN official dialogues would be there, and other forms of cooperation. And then if I can quickly come to the defense cooperation perspective. So defense cooperation is one of the very important elements in India-ASEAN partnership. India also has IORA, that is Indian Ocean Rim Association. And one last point that I would like to focus is people-to-people contacts. Sorry. So these are few of the aspects where India
You have to conclude in 2 minutes, please.
Yes, I'm concluding now, ma'am. So these are few of the aspects where India can enhance its partnership and cooperation with ASEAN. So I'm concluding my discussion, and I would welcome your feedback and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sampa. I think you highlighted some very important aspects, and especially, freedom of navigation in the seas, which ASEAN and India desire together. So I will request the next speaker to now make her presentation. May I invite Arushi Singh? She is a student with the Manipal Academy of Higher Education, and she will be speaking to us about the role of Indian armed forces in humanitarian and disaster relief operations. So the floor is yours, Arushi.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the slides, the PPT slide. Excuse me, ma'am, the PPT slides. Ma'am, you have to share the screen or put the slides on.
Yes, yes.
You can share yourself. Try to share it.
Okay, so just a minute.
You are a co-host, so you can share it.
Okay, ma'am. Just a minute.
Share your screen. So 10 minutes, Arushi.
Yes, ma'am, I'm unable to share. Ma'am, can you start the PPT?
Maybe just give us a few minutes, ma'am. Can we start with the next presentation?
Okay. All right. So we'll wait for Arushi to get her slides on. May I now invite Nayanika Dutta. She's also a student with Manipal Academy of Higher Education, and she'll be speaking to us about India's responses to the Rohingya crisis using national security as a case in point. So Nayanika, are you there? Please unmute yourself, and you have 10 minutes.
All right. So a very good morning to all. First of all, I would like to thank Jaiswal sir and the team of NIICE for giving me this wonderful platform. I am really happy today and really honored to be a part of this. So as it goes, so my topic of presentation today is India's responses to the Rohingya crisis, and I'm using national security as a case in point. So I'll be talking about the debate surrounding the national security in the context of the Rohingyas. So South Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world, and the whole of it is sort of characteristic of this dynamic interplay of economy, diplomacy, and the factors of security. And it does revolve around the various discourses about the geography, human rights, natural disasters, and the historical events that have led to a lot of migration within the region, and of course religion and so much more. Today the various borders commissions simply adds on to the whole complexity in this region. Therefore, Rohingya crisis is no different. Myanmar's crackdown on the Rohingya population the neighborhood. So India's status as a very preferred refugee destination to the Rohingya issue is based on an larger understanding of the history and the complexities of the Myanmar politics. So India surely has had to balance between the security and the moral concerns, regardless of India's like how the approaches towards Rohingya is largely seen. There is a common consensus that it is largely influenced by a variety of factors such as diplomacy, domestic political compulsions, geopolitics. So with time, these variables have changed, but what has remained constant was have formal national sort of policy for the refugees. This is keeping in mind the political and the security. So as stated in the various documents back in the late 80s, when Myanmar was trying to suppress its struggle for democracy, roughly 3,000 nationals had sought refuge in India. And the government of India had welcomed them and had given the status of the government of India refugees. Similar has been the case with the Sri Lankan Tamils. They were welcomed into the Indian borders when most of them didn't even have the documents of travel and other things. While India is not signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention, it still is party to the various agreements of various, conventions on human rights and refugee matters. So the debates about resource crunch is very much important here. Talking in the context of the northeastern states of India, especially from the point of view of the state of Assam, the problems imposed by the massive migrants coming from the state of Bangladesh has rarely been about the religion factor, but has mostly revolved around concerns about lack of resources versus more mouths to feed. Apart from various other tensions, I mean, like in the field of cultural homogenization and various things in the same manner, which is rather a cause for the growth of militancy in the region. Therefore, the disturbance of the native indigenous population in sensitive zones like that in itself is a major threat to the national security. So India has been a victim of terrorism time and again, which is why the security issue continues to be a larger concern. Reports have suggested that India had time to time been tapping on the influence of foreign radical groups on the Rohingyas through its consulate at Sitwe. Also had warned of a growing presence of Pakistan-based and funded militant activities that sort of wish to seek to exploit the resentments of the Rohingya population. So truly, India has been sort of dealing with this on a very moderate basis. It has provided aid assistance to the Rakhine Developmental Program, seeing it as a long-term solution of social and economic growth in the state of Rakhine. Financial aids have been forwarded for the development of the various projects to support the returning population. So there also has emerged a strong need for India to formulate on a diplomatic balance between Myanmar and Bangladesh to serve one, its security concerns, two, to keep the goals of Act East policy alive, and three, to sort of keep a check on the growing Chinese influence in the region. Some of the common solutions, as per most South Asian nations researchers, has been one, that normalcy will be restored as and when the Rohingyas are sent back to their home state, which is why India has been strongly urging the Myanmar government to work on its developmental projects in the state of Rakhine. The second point is about Delhi's concerns regarding the global, seeking mutual cooperation from the larger global community at large, and there needs to be a management of the crisis with restraints keeping in mind the welfare and the well-being of the people of the region. So India has partnered closely with both Myanmar and Bangladesh over security concerns, cooperations to sort of deter terror groups from coming and radicalizing the Rohingyas in the camps, in the refugee camps. Both states being members of the BIMSTEC, so there's this bilateral angle of the Rohingya issues, which may have an impact on the functioning of BIMSTEC, but India is highly motivated to use this platform to sort of cooperate, mediate over security and economic concerns. Taking into consideration the nature of the Rohingya crisis, there is a need for regional solution and states coming together on mutual terms to solve this crisis, because the size and the complexity of the problem is intense, and no one state can solve it. So India and the ASEAN nations more or less hold similar positions on this, and both see the ramping up of economic and social developments in the state of Rakhine as a long-term solution to this, as both are aware that they would be the first ones to face the consequences of any terror activities arising from sort of radicalizing the Rohingyas. So largely security, geopolitics, financial concerns have been crucial in shaping India's response to the Rohingya crisis. But India has diplomatically found ways to help the Rohingyas without having any fallout with the state of Myanmar at large. So that's it. I think I will end it here. Thank you so much. Ma'am, I can't hear you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Nayanika. You have presented the view of India and how it should tackle the Rohingya crisis, which it has been doing. It has built houses. So state bazaar. And with the COVID crisis, things are even more difficult. And there's also limited capacity of states to respond. I think you should be looking at is Myanmar is going to go in for elections very soon. So we'll also have to see how that changes the landscape of the Rohingyas.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
So may I request Arushi if she is ready now
Yes,
with
ma'am.
her presentation?
Ma'am, is it visible, ma'am, the screen?
Yes, we are waiting for you to share it.
Ma'am, just a minute.
We are sharing it. Please start.
Ma'am, I shared it. Is it visible, ma'am, on the screen?
No. Yes, now it's visible. Yes.
Ma'am, now?
Yes, please start, Arushi. Yes, we are looking forward to your presentation.
Ma'am, now is it visible? Ma'am,
Yes,
can I start?
yes.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Arushi Singh. I'm a master's student at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at Manipal University. I would like to thank NICE for this opportunity, for this wonderful opportunity to present my paper. The topic of my paper is the role in humanitarian and disaster relief. This is the format of my presentation. First, I will talk about the objectives of the research, then the relevance and significance, then my analysis, and before concluding. So the objectives of my research include understanding the concept of humanitarian and disaster relief operations, then analyzing the role of the Indian Armed Forces in these operations, and then assessing the future trajectory of these operations. The role of the Indian Armed Forces in humanitarian and disaster relief operations is incredibly significant, as we have seen a number of we have seen a drastic increase in threats, both natural and man-made, due to global warming and other concerns. This requires a dynamic approach not only from the civil authorities but also the armed forces. Particularly in developing countries such as India and the majority of countries in our neighborhood, as we are particularly vulnerable. Not only do we possess a very dense, very densely populated coastal areas, but we also have inadequate infrastructure to tackle these rising threats. Moreover, HDR activities are very important and do assist significantly in power projection. For example, when in the Philippines there was a natural disaster, US was able to transfers more than 13,000 kilometers in 2 days, and was not only able to deploy troops but also was able to transport vital supplies, food supplies. This also helps in very positive perception creation and goodwill creation, which can be important in the future. The implementation of an effective and time efficient response is also important. Not only it showcases the country's strategic lead, but it also showcases the planning and the forward thinking approach of a country. For example, we can see this in the case of South Korea, and how that created a great amount of goodwill for the country itself. In the current context with the coronavirus pandemic, we have seen armed forces being around the country. For example, in being deployed to enforce lockdown so as to flatten the curve and to facilitate in the disinfection of public spaces, as well as to construct various areas for quarantine. We have also seen distribution of medical supplies and food supplies from strategic stockpiles, and also for increasing security at the borders. Moreover, as in the future a vaccine comes in, that will require very comprehensive and very effective distribution. For that, the armed forces are, as they are aware and familiar with the terrain of the country, they will play a great role. First of my objectives relates to the concept itself of what are HADR operations. For example, these operations come under military or to as regional stability operations, because we see in humanitarian crisis and disaster, natural disaster situations, this leads to does lead to a great deal of instability in the region. And if aid is provided, also require specializations and preparedness, particularly in a diverse range of domains, such as security, medical assistance, which is required, and medical operations, which do lead to significant saving of lives. More importantly, in these operations also require engineering and logistical expertise. For example, maintenance of airports, through which way vital supplies do come in, and of course roads for the distribution of these supplies. There is also resource scarcity during these crises, such as of fuel, hydrocarbons. So the armed forces can handle management, and they do handle management. Another one of the factors that is overlooked is communication equipment, which is essential in these times, as that can lead to saving life of and infrastructures worth billions of dollars and rupees. Operations are also based on very particular values and principles, such as shared humanity. 80% of the country, when Indonesia suffered severe earthquake and tsunami, they put a 90-day limit on the armed forces of other countries with HADR operations and missions. More importantly, this consent and restraint shows and leads to goodwill creation for the country and a great perception boost. My second objective relates to the role of the Indian Armed Forces and HADR operations. Indian forces and their involvement in these operations are shaped by the unique cultural experiences of India, such as the Gandhian principles, and more importantly, such as by the religious values of Buddhism, Islam, Sikhism, as these religions put a great deal of value on solidarity with suffering and also helping to alleviate the suffering. More importantly, values and past experiences such as non-alignment. This also leads to particular approaches being taken. For example, the Indian HADR approach is different from the Western approach. Indian armed forces are not involved in providing humanitarian and disaster relief if the conflict has occurred due to civil wars or wars between different nation states, as this is in direct conflict with the country's non-alignment values. And Indian approach and Indian armed forces also, for example, give aid and Indian approach is very focused on reconstruction, as that leads to long-term stability. More importantly, India has also been focusing on mission-based deployments. Even if, for example, if an Indian naval ship is conducting anti-piracy operations, it has to have a HADR kit just in case it needs to be deployed for assistance. More importantly, India has also provided various other developed nations, such as the US, with aid. For example, after the Hurricane Katrina, India has also provided Sri Lanka and Bangladesh in its own neighborhood with aid. And even rival countries or countries that there is amount of rivalry. It has rivalry with like Pakistan. During the earthquake in 2005, which India itself suffered, India provided aid. In subsequent years, India has also tried to provide aid, but the approaches of India and Pakistan are quite different, which has hindered this capacity building opportunity between the two countries. More importantly, India has also provided Myanmar with aid during a cyclone, which contained vital supplies such as rice, which is the staple food of the country. In the given slide, we can see flood relief being provided in Myanmar. And in the next photograph, we can see Indian troops working to improve roads due to flooding in Assam. And In the third photographs, we can see Indian Air Force working in tandem with the Indian Navy and providing relief to Indonesia. And last relief in the country, it's Chennai, Uttarakhand, and more importantly, in other countries in the region. This also requires a great deal of experience, expertise, and capacity building. But in Mozambique, the future trajectory of HAD is very promising with the armed forces of different countries in the regions they are operating. For example, there's this another work program, ADMIR, of the ASEAN countries, which has increase in capacity building and decrease in allotted for deployments. Would also lead to saving lives and infrastructure worth billions. More importantly, India must also work on constructing warning systems, contingency formulation. This is something that Japanese have been working on, and India has worked with the Japanese, and this provides an opportunity for future involvement and participation, coordination between the two countries. Another interesting factor is in the coronavirus pandemic, we saw the USS Comfort coming into New York when the hospitals and the healthcare system was overwhelmed. These kinds of ships, we can see in the photo given below, like the Comfort and the Mercy, they have been particularly made and engineered for these kinds of operations. Even the Chinese with the peace arc have been working towards constructing these kinds of ships, which do generate a great deal of goodwill. India must also be involved in constructions of these kinds of equipment. Though India is moving in the right direction and bolstering its own equipment, such as LPD, landing dock platforms, and other kinds of equipment that are specially made for these kinds of things. I would like to conclude with highlighting the fact that the Indian Armed Forces are not only the first line of defense, they are also the first line of assistance. And for even the exercises that India conducts with other countries do lead to better strategic partnership and strategic interactions, which in the future can help multiple countries greatly. India has also, even with the Chinese in the recent conference, even though through these recent rivalries sparking up, we can see there is hope, as even in 2019, even last year, India conducted exercises with the Chinese. India must also, moreover, India must invest in capacity building if it hopes to take advantage of the opportunities given by HADR activities and exercises and missions. India can start to build specialized branches and rescue corps. And India can also start working on developing HADR standby teams, and we can learn with different countries, work with different countries. This not only gives India immense opportunities, it also provides India the opportunity to lead itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arushi. I think you brought in several points, and in fact, you've given a very comprehensive view of how Indian armed forces are helping in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Also, since we are engaged with Nepal, with NICE, I think it would be important to highlight just 5 years ago, the Nepal earthquake also had Indian, forces helping out in reconstruction. I think about 9,000 to 10,000 people lost their lives and several thousands were also injured. Another very important point, I think you brought it out, which is high tech, the use of high tech and digital infrastructure to really be able to, immediately, so that we have much faster responses. So thank you for that very wonderful and comprehensive presentation. We'll now go on to the fourth presentation of our session by Gazala Fareedi. And Gazala Fareedi is from Southfield College, and she will be speaking to us about the role of media and India-Nepal relations. So we have seen how the media sometimes just whips up frenzy, on small issues which can be managed diplomatically, but sometimes things get, a little off the mark when the media is responding, which is not really helpful for bringing two countries together. So I'll now request you there.
Yes, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, a very good morning to Dr. Marwah and Dr. Jaiswal and all present here. I would like to thank NICE for giving me an opportunity to be a part of this much needed and wonderful initiative. As already stated by the chair, my topic is the role of media and India-Nepal relations. Briefly, I will be focusing on 5 major points in this presentation. Firstly, I'll be talking about how various forms of media have become an overpowering element in all facets of our lives. The second point I would like to focus on is enumerating some instances of media reportage in the India-Nepal relations, both in the past and in the present times. Thirdly, I'll be focusing on laying out the arguments of how such sensationalist reportage was hurting the bilateral relations. Fourthly, I will be presenting some of the existing theoretical discourse on the relationship between media and foreign policy. And lastly, I'll be giving my concluding remarks. So beginning with the first point, since the beginning of the ICT revolution, the role of media has become more profound in every facet of our lives. This is all the more true for electronic media and social media. The influence of media on foreign policy and diplomacy has also been enthusiastically debated and discussed academically and otherwise. Terms like agenda setting and framing have come from media studies into the domain of international politics, with many interdisciplinary studies going on, which is also a very good thing for the domain of international politics as the field is being broadened and deepened. Now, coming to the second part, media's role has come yet again to the center stage in India-Nepal relations in the year 2020. Media here, let me clarify that I'm specially referring to news channels mainly based in New Delhi and social media like Twitter. Not because other forms of media elsewhere regionally are less important, but because the national debate is unfortunately centered on media emanating either from New Delhi or Kathmandu. And the focus of my presentation will mainly be on Indian media. The time now coming to media's role in the past and the present situation. In the past, the last time the media's role was highlighted in India-Nepal relations was in 2015, when citizens of Nepal had vehemently objected to the manner in which the Indian media had covered the help provided by India to Nepal after the earthquake, and the trending of the Twitter hashtag Go Home Indian Media was there, with the coverage being tagged as insensitive and overhyping of India's role, and ultimately it did become a kind of a public relations disaster for India. Now, if we go back a bit further in time, media sensationalism ruled the day even during the hijacking of the Indian Airlines IC-814 from Kathmandu to Kandahar in 1999, where the media focused on only the security lapses in Nepal to such an extent plans that Indians had themselves booked were cancelled. The other time that media's role was highlighted was the alleged comments made by Bollywood actor Hrithik Roshan in December 2000, where he had allegedly said that he dislikes Nepal, and then riots had ensued, and anything Indian had been attacked in Nepal. Now, coming to the present time, in May 2020, the territorial dispute between India and Nepal became an open wound in the relationship since the virtual inauguration of the link road, the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra route by Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh. Now, since the road passes through territories also claimed by Nepal, it responded to this by amending its own constitution to include a new political map. that included the disputed territories of Kalapani, Lipulek, and Limpiadura. Now, following this, the media has played the role of adding fuel to fire in the bilateral relationships with their jingoistic and sensationalist reporting, often bordering on the creation of fictional stories, which has greatly irritated our friends on the other side of the border. And some channels that can be mentioned here, which has been quoted thoroughly in the media there or by people in Nepal, are channels like Republic TV, which use the hashtag of China uses Nepal, or Z News, where Sudhir Chaudhary even ran a show of the Chinese ambassador to Nepal honey trapping Prime Minister Oli, or APB News, which asked if Manisha Koirala was dancing on the tunes of China, among others. Now, such uncouth reportage compels the government in Nepal to lodge a protest with India, and the cable operators in Nepal also chose to block all news channels of India except Doordarshan. Now, after having highlighted this, I'm coming to the third part of the presentation. And the third part says that, many scholars and journalists have argued that such reporting seriously harms the bilateral. Some of these journalists are journalists like Shastri Ramachandran, who has argued that the media being increasingly being used to target rival parties and minorities in domestic politics, and such a reportage has now spilled onto the foreign domain with regard to our western neighbor Pakistan, but now it is also being used for Nepal and China. Another journalist called Kunal Purohit raises the question of whether India was deliberately using its media to attack Nepal as it becomes closer to China. This points to the media towing the line of the government ferociously. However, there were also articles that pointed to the diversity of media public opinion and urged citizens of Nepal not to get carried away by only one type of hyper nationalistic journalism coming out of India. But this section, a picture of the media was created which brought forth what James Hogue had written in 1994 in a Foreign Affairs article, and to quote, he had written that these capabilities of modern media to be immediate, sensational, and pervasive are unsettling the conduct of foreign affairs. So in this section I just highlighted how scholars are writing that such reportage are harming the bilateral relationship. Now I'm coming to the fourth part of my presentation, and in this part, having briefly stated the present situation, I would like to focus on what some of the theoretical discourses has enumerated on the relationship between media and foreign policy. Now there's a lot of stuff already there in the discourse, out of which I would like to mention three particular terms that I would like to highlight. And those three terms are, firstly, the Vietnam War syndrome; second, the CNN effect; and thirdly, the manufacturing consent model. Now, just to give you a brief this thing on the three terms, the term Vietnam War syndrome was formulated during the end of the Vietnam War, when it was stated that one of the main reasons why the US pulled out of the war was due to the role of the media. Now, since the Vietnam War was the first television war, media images of American soldiers dying in battle and the picture of body bags being brought to America played a major role in changing American opinion against the war. This is what the Vietnam War syndrome says. That means in the Vietnam War syndrome theory, media is given an independent role in influencing foreign policy. That means that it takes the role of an independent variable. It takes the role of the cause. Now, coming to the second term, which is the CNN effect. Now, the CNN effect term became popular during Operation Provide Safe Haven after the first Gulf War in Iraq in 1991 and Somalia in 1992. Now, the claim was that the media played a very important role in bringing forth into implementation both these humanitarian interventions, with the highly critical coverage in the first case of the Kurdish refugees fleeing from Iraqi forces during the first Gulf War, and in the second instance of starving images and reports of starving children from Somalia, in 1992, which brought into the humanitarian intervention called Operation Restore Hope. Now, what is to be highlighted is that both the Vietnam War syndrome and the CNN effect treat the media as an independent agency, which has the power of influencing foreign policy decisions as serious as pulling out of war and undertaking a humanitarian mission in another sovereign territory. So they give a very important role to the media. Now, this is in contrast to the third term, which I'm going to highlight, which is the manufacturing consent model given by Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky. Now, according to this model, the media propagandize on the behalf of the powerful societal interests that finances and control them. And in the manufacturing consent model, two things are very important, that is the structural factors and the functional factors. Now, structural factors like ownership patterns and sources of media funding becomes very prominent, which go on to impact the functional factors, which are the selection of appropriate thinking media personnel who conform to the institution standard of what is to be counted as newsworthiness, what to highlight, how to set the agenda, what are the framing strategies, how to frame a particular debate. So you will, once the structural factors are there, they will push into the functional factors, which will then tell us who to choose as a media personnel. Now, the manufacturing consent model does not give the media the role of an independent variable or the cause, but rather makes the media dependent on socio-economic political factors. Now, considering all these 4 points, I would like to come to my last point. Now, the last point is that considering what these theoretical models posit and how the media has been behaving in the case of India and Nepal, I would like to conclude by saying that in all issues of foreign policy and diplomacy among various political entities, one cannot say that only either of these two opposing scenarios are operating at a given point of time. So one cannot say that, no, I think this is totally manufacturing consent model or this is totally the CNN effect, because there is so much diversity among the media itself, and there might be some media channels which are relatively more independent in their functioning than others. However, I would also like to state that with regard to media's influence on foreign policy, it is very difficult to give the media the role of an independent variable or the cause. Now, this is not to absolve the media. It is
We've
very
lost
difficult to
your,
give the media the role of, and there is a larger consensus among the political. Hello?
yes,
Am
we
I
can hear you
audible?
now. We can hear you now.
Okay, so however, I would like to state that with regard to media's influence on foreign policy, it is difficult to give the media the role of an independent variable until the political class desires and there is a larger consensus among political parties. No policy initiative can either be implemented or withdrawn by the virtue of just being supported or opposed by the media. So until and unless there is a strong political group or movement supporting the same, the media on its own cannot impact foreign policy. The same is true for relations between India and Nepal. If there is policy certainty among the political class, then no amount of media vitiating the atmosphere with its negative reportage can make the government change its course. Now, this is not to absolve the media of its responsibility of maintaining basic dignity and respect while reporting on sensitive issues, as they do play a very important role in formulating public opinion. But at the same point of time, a high level of discourse on politics and speech needs to be maintained by important people in the government or the army on either side of the border, so that the media do not get a chance to pick on these petty statements. If the media do take a nationalistic stand on any side of the border, it will create a ripple effect on the other side. And this will force us to question oneself whether there is any space left for a neutral and ethical media anywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gazala. I think you really touched upon very, very critical factors and the role of media in foreign policy for any country. And that's why it's so significant, you know, when the media is reporting, that to report facts as they are and not twist and turn them and do misreporting. And especially now with social media and all of that, you know, things really have a multiplier effect, and especially it's the negative impact which is, you know, a lot of weightage, and it gets carried away also very fast. So thank you for your very wonderful exposition of the subject and the role of media and how it played such an important role in framing public opinion during the Vietnam War, which was really, an important part. So now we'll go on to the next presentation. We have Rushali Saha. She's a research associate with the Center for Air Power Studies. And Rushali will be speaking about sub-regionalism as a driver for Indo-Nepal cooperation. So I think after speaking about the negative impacts of jingoism in the media, we really need to pave the way for bringing in Greater Nepal in a cooperation, considering that we share a kith and kin relationship, so many Nepalese students educated here, your former foreign secretaries, ministers, and all of that. So the Hindu kingdom, which we revere greatly, and our relations with Nepal are so sacred, actually, that I think this is going to again be a very important presentation. So I look forward to listening to you. Rushali, yes.
Thank you so much for the recognition, respected Chair, and very good afternoon to everybody present here. It's a great honor being a part of this panel, and especially the fact that it's all women-led makes it all the more special for me. So I'd like to thank NICE for this opportunity. And before I delve into the details of my topic, I would like to thank Gazala. She set the tone for my presentation in many ways. So we're all quite aware of the recent developments which have been taking place, which has quite significantly marred what ma'am rightfully depicted as a very special relationship which we share with Nepal. This assertiveness which is being displayed by Nepal in fairly recent times is something which has taken the Indian strategic circle by surprise, some would say. And it has unleashed a fathom of speculations, and a lot of people have a lot of things to say about this. And one of them is that China is responsible for Nepal's assertive behavior. Now, of course, this is extremely debatable, and I'll not go into this, but one thing I will point out is that it is true that the nature of Chinese engagement with Nepal has definitely changed. So earlier we knew that there was a fear of Chinese expansionism, which in fact was a driver for the Treaty of Peace and Friendship which we signed with Nepal in 1950, but that fear has increasingly been replaced by political and economic engagement, and we now see that Nepal is a crucial partner for China in its BRI project. And during this period, what we've also witnessed is that relations with India have taken a nosedive. So there is a correlation, therefore, between Chinese increased engagement in the region and India's deteriorating influence in Nepal. The relationship between India and Nepal, which I'll try to bring out in my presentation, is that it has been quite turbulent. And I propose that we need a new framework in dealing with Nepal. And that rhetorical statements of Roti Beti Ka Sambandh and everything is no longer quite right in approaching Nepal. We need to adopt a more pragmatic approach. And I believe that sub-regionalism is the answer to this. So let me first address the obvious question that might have crossed your mind, is that why sub-regionalism? Why not regionalism? So it's true that globalization has greatly intensified international competition all around the world, but at the same time, it gave rise to a new wave of regionalism. Now, to be clear, regionalism has a lot of definitions. So in this presentation, I'm using the definition of regionalism as a comprehensive, multidimensional process, which implies a change of a particular region from heterogeneity to increased homogeneity with regard to security, culture, economic policies, and political regimes. Now, South Asia as a region is definitely one of the most dynamic regions in the world, but it remains one of the least integrated regions. According to World Bank data from as recent as 2019, intra-regional trade accounts for only 5% of South Asia's trade. Compare that with ASEAN, where it is 25%. But this does not mean that efforts at regionalism have not taken place. As a matter of fact, India, which recognizes that South Asian stability is critical for its own internal stability and development, has been quite optimistic about regionalism. We had Prime Minister Nehru champion the notions of Asian solidarity. There were initiatives such as the Asian Relations Conference, the Bandung Conference, But we see that historically, because of the geopolitical setup and because of the political tensions in the region, these efforts have failed. The single fact that not one singly SARC-driven project has been accomplished is quite evident of how ineffective SARC has also been as a regional forum. So, as I mentioned, the setup of South Asia is such that we have political tensions, we have mistrust, we have cross-border conflicts, we have security concerns. So it would be wrong to compare it with the European experience of regionalism, where EU is taken as the model project for regional integration. It's because that we have to understand the nations in South Asia, they're still in the process of nation building. And they're too closely wedded to the construct of nation to give up the idea and embrace shared sovereignty. So I argue that instead of asking for integration, what we should be asking for is strengthening interlinkages. And this is where I believe sub-regionalism can be a very effective thing to increase linkages. When we're increasing linkages, our focus is on win-win cooperation. We talk about mutual benefits. That is what is needed in South Asia, given the failure of regionalism largely in this region. So what is sub-regionalism? So this idea was actually initiated by the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, with a view to continue cooperation in core areas of development among adjacent nations or like-minded nations, so the whole process of cooperation moves ahead without any obstacles. In South Asia, it was with the South Asian Growth Quadrangle in 1996 that this concept was introduced. So we had geographically contiguous nations of Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, which met to enhance regional solidarity and promote overall development within SARC. India has subsequently embraced sub-regionalism, as evident from its participation in BIMSTEC, in BBIN, in Mekong-Ganga cooperation projects, etc., but it has still not developed it to its fullest potential. Professor S.D. Mooney, who is a well-known expert on Nepal, has argued that when it comes to India's neighborhood diplomacy, the one thing that we've gotten wrong is that we've unduly insisted on bilateralism. And doing so has evoked fears and suspicions of India's dominance. And this in turn has allowed anti-Indian systems to exploit the situation. And therefore, India should take the multilateral option. My proposition in this presentation is a variant of this argument itself, where by multilateralism, I specifically want to look at sub-regionalism. Now, how does India-Nepal relations fit into this framework? Why sub-regionalism, specifically in Indo-Nepal cooperations? For that, I'll briefly comment on the nature of relationships, which I had alluded to previously and I described as turbulent. So you have to understand India-Nepal relations with reference to the domestic politics of Nepal. It was ruled by Hindu kings until 2007, after which it embraced secularism and democracy. And India's interests we see during the region actually suffered the most during the periods of monarchical supremacy. So 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. During this period, which was a monarchical rule, India's interests were suffering, and therefore India supported openly Jan Andolan 1, which successfully introduced multi-party democracy, although for a short period of time, and then again in Jan Andolan 2. Delhi took a stand against the Maoists, and subsequently when the Maoists came back to victory in 2008, India's interests again suffered. After this, I directly jumped to 2015, which we know was a major low in Indo-Nepal relations, where Nepal complained of interference and how the blockade, the unofficial blockade, crippled Nepal's economy. And it was during this time that actually China had emerged as a lucrative alternative. Okay, and KP Oli's unabashed pro-China posture is something which has made Indians quite uncomfortable, which is true because given the delicate geopolitics of this region. During this time, I'll bring your attention to the 1990s specifically, where India adopted, because of the end of Cold War and we adopted economic liberalization, what India did was it was looking for a region, a stable region where it could invest economically to boost its own economy. And this is where the neighborhood came into play, as we know. But to achieve this, the main problem was structural impediments, which was the lack of physical and soft connectivity and infrastructural constraints. This is where BBIN framework came into place. Now, there are a lot of sub-regional initiatives, but because of the paucity of time, I'll just be looking at BBIN and try to show that it can be a model for sub-regional cooperatives in the region. So if you look at the BBIN, yes, ma'am. If you look at the BBIN region, there is major potential for trade, but again, the main hindrance has been high tariffs among nations, which accounts for the low intra-regional trade. Now, India and Nepal have been the drivers of BBIN and the MBA agreement in this, where they have rail transport agreements. There are a lot of studies which have actually shown that how successful India-Nepal cooperation has been, but I'll not go into the details of this. My argument essentially is that if India wants to retain its political and economic significance, it has to take a lead in the integration project. And this it can do only through sub-regionalism, because sub-regionalism focuses on win-win cooperation. Through this, India can overcome the arguments that it is trying to dominate the region, etc. And it can actually focus on connectivity. Most importantly, it can provide an alternative to China's BRI initiative and show that it too has the ability to sort of integrate the region. Security concerns are definitely legitimate, but India has to understand that neighbors are not a source of threat. Just like India has its own securities, our smaller neighbors have their own insecurities too, which have to be acknowledged. So therefore, the focus has to be on building cooperative networks, which will create an environment for reciprocal action and overall be quite successful. Hence, that's why I argue that sub-regionalism should be the approach forward in Indo-Nepal relations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yes, we are looking forward to the motor vehicles agreement being signed among BBI. So, but there are issues in that. But physical connectivity is extremely important for sub-regionalism. Also, BCIM, BIMSTEC, these are all sub-regional initiatives because SARC didn't work, so we had to try and circumvent, sort of Pakistan. So we'll go on to the next presentation, Shairee Malhotra, Associate Researcher at the European Institute for Asian Studies. So we are moving beyond South Asia and Southeast Asia now. We're going to EU and then we'll come back again a little bit closer to Central Asia. So Shairee will be speaking to us about India-EU partnership in the post-COVID-19 world. So Shairee, where are you based?
I'm in India at the moment, madam.
Okay, great. So let's begin with your presentation. Then
I'm just going to
forward to Q&A. Yes.
Sorry, can you see my screen?
We could see it a minute ago.
Okay, just a second. Actually, would it be possible for Nice to be able to share it for me? I've sent them my presentation.
Sunena is trying to do that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, perfect. So mine is no longer there, right?
Yeah.
I don't see it actually, the screen. Is it being shared? Hello?
Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
I've been sharing the screen.
Is there a problem? Yes. Please start, Shairee.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you to Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement for inviting me to speak on their summit. And thank you to Dr. Marwah for moderating the session. So the topic for my presentation is the India-EU partnership in a post-COVID world. And I think it's great timing for me to touch upon this topic with you all because, the EU-India summit just took place 3 days ago. It was due to happen in March originally, but it got postponed due to the coronavirus. So I'll just first start with giving you a little bit of background and context to the relationship. Could we move on to the next slide, please? So the strategic partnership between the EU and India was signed in 2004 on the basis of both being, natural partners, owing to a commonality of values. Both are complex democracies, pluralistic, diverse societies, and they cooperate on a broad range of areas. I've just listed some of them there. Trade, development, technology, security, energy transition, etc. Could we move on to the next slide, please? But the partnership in general has been disappointing for many. In fact, one of my favorite descriptions of it is loveless arranged marriage. Because common values haven't necessarily translated into common action. One of the biggest issues has been that the partnership just hasn't been strategic enough. It's focused on trade, development issues, economics, because the EU, the European Union, as we know, is an economic powerhouse. It's a trading bloc of 27 EU member states, and India does not see the EU as a strategic actor. For the EU as well, it never really perceived India as an actor that was, intrinsic to its own strategic interests. And there have been other dampeners. India, as we know, has robust relations with many European Union member states, including France, Germany, and it prefers to deal with these bilaterally because it's just so much more simpler and easier than go through Brussels, and the bureaucratic and over complex European Union institutions. So India really has been confined to using countries like France, the UK, which is of course due to depart the EU soon, as gateways to Europe. And a lot less attention has traditionally been paid to Brussels. And then one of the largest sticking points in the relationship has been, the EU-India FTA, the Free Trade Agreement negotiations, which began in 2007. They were then stalled in 2013. They resumed in 2018. But even though 16 rounds of talks have taken place, there hasn't really been any progress on many of the sticking points. And there have been more recent dampeners. In February this year, the European Parliament tabled resolutions critiquing India's actions in Kashmir last year, in the aftermath of India's abrogation of Article 370. The resolutions also critiqued India's Citizenship Amendment Act, and even though it was only the European Parliament, which is just one institution in this complex European Union, it didn't go down well with India. As we know, India is a country that dreads what it perceives external interference into its internal affairs. So yes, there have been a number of dampeners in the strategic partnership. Could we move on to the next slide, please? But despite this rather pessimistic picture that I've just presented to you all, there has also been remarkable momentum, in fact, in the last few years. And this is evident mostly in recent policy documents, especially the 2018 EU strategy on India. Now you can see here, I've listed some of the key points in the strategy. So the strategy really is a game changer because it views India through a strategic lens. It calls India a geopolitical pillar in a multipolar Asia, and it considers it crucial to maintain the balance of power in the region. It also goes further and proposes instruments to translate common values into practical cooperation. So you can see this entire shift, that's happening in the EU's perception of India, and this is very much in tandem with the shift happening in the EU's perception of itself as well. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has repeatedly stressed that she wants to give Brussels a more geopolitical role now. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So, now let me come to the present scenario, which is COVID-19. COVID-19 really is a sort of, eureka moment for the world. It's exposed existing trends, vulnerabilities of the global order, institutions are under stress, geopolitical contestations have taken over. And amidst this global crisis of leadership, with the US in retreat, China's overall conduct has been exposed. These contestations that have emerged are in a sense having implications for middle powers such as EU, India, but even Japan, Australia, who are now finding themselves at a sort of strategic crossroads. They're beginning to navigate the space in between and trying to find their voice in this newly emerging global order that is taking shape. And they're beginning to rethink their strategic priorities because they now know they can no longer rely on American leadership. They're all wary of Chinese efforts to unilaterally shape geopolitics, and they're starting to look for like-minded partners elsewhere. So one can say it's really a sort of, moment of reckoning for middle powers that's taking place. And both the EU and India in each other find ready partners now. Could we move on to the next slide, please? And now I'll come to the elephant in the room, which is, of course, China. So the EU and India find themselves, I would say, in somewhat similar situations on China as well today. Traditionally, they both pursued policies of engagement, cooperation with China. They've both been careful of not becoming part of this overall, US-China geopolitical clash. In fact, the EU's chief diplomat, Joseph Borrell, in a very interesting quote said, "Following Frank Sinatra, we Europeans have to do things my way." So this is really indicative of, Brussels' approach to China so far. But, we've seen during the pandemic, ties with China have reached new lows for both the EU and India. They both realize that the status quo can no longer persist. For India, it has, of course, been the recipient of a deadly attack on Indian soldiers in the Galwan Valley standoff. But even, for Europe, China has been indulging in what's being called mask diplomacy, by helping countries like Italy and Spain that were first affected by the virus at a time when Brussels, couldn't really come up with an adequate policy to help out. So in a sense, China has opportunistically exploited divisions within Europe. I mean, this sounds very eerily similar to India's own experiences in South Asia, in a sense, where India's neighborhood today appears more to be China's than India's. I mean, we've seen serious tensions between Nepal and India, as Gazala and Rushali very well explained to us. We've seen trends of the Chinese debt trap affecting financial stability in countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and even with the BRI. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Even with the BRI, we see increasing convergence between the EU and India. India, of course, we know has been cautious about the BRI from the beginning. It was one of the first countries to articulate concerns about it based on, lack of transparency, etc. But even within the EU, that was initially enthusiastic about the BRI, perceptions are starting to change. Countries in Central and Eastern Europe traditionally welcome Chinese investments because they suffer from higher unemployment rates, slow economic growth. And this led to a watering down of statements by the EU on China-related concerns, such as the South China Sea, human rights violations. And the EU has been, I would say, increasingly alarmed by this divide and rule tactic, which they perceive as undermining European solidarity, European cohesion. So really, both the EU and India have woken up to the reality of increasing Chinese influence in their neighborhoods. Both are beginning to re-examine their equations, their policies with China, and they're trying to diversify their relationships to balance Beijing. Could we move on to the next slide? And against this global, against this global backdrop of events, the EU-India summit took place just 3 days ago, and there's a roadmap for further cooperation that was released during the summit. You can see it here. It's called Roadmap for 2025, and you can access the 2 pages on the link I've put there. Now you compare this enthusiasm with the EU-China summit, which didn't even result in a joint statement. So I think the summit couldn't have happened at a better time when political will, imagination on both sides is stronger than ever. And I've listed some of the key takeaways from the summit here. Some of the obvious ones: COVID response, research on vaccines, but strengthening multilateralism is a really important one. Both want to work together to strengthen multilateralism that is increasingly coming under strain. And one of the highlights really has been the setting up of a high-level trade and investment dialogue. The others, climate action, maritime security, of course. Now, can we just quickly move on to the next slide? I'll just talk about the trade part. As I said, a high-level trade and investment dialogue has been decided upon at the summit. And this is really important because we're all at a point of time where the economic fallout from the pandemic needs to be managed by everybody. The significance of trade deals has become even more important now, given concerns that many countries want to reduce economic reliance on China. This could make, the EU and India more pragmatic, make them resort to certain concessions on issues related to trade. The EU is, of course, worried about India turning more protectionist, especially given recent announcements of becoming self-reliant. But even though, the FTA is a distant dream, given all the painful issues, the recently concluded EU-Vietnam FTA actually shows us that it's possible to find common ground and compromise. And with Brexit looming ahead of us, India's gateway into the European market will no longer be there. This actually gives India a chance to deepen its relationship with both the EU and the UK and push it to sort of diversify into European cities and capitals. And I'm just going to, quote this interesting stark statistic by German think tank Bertelsmann Stiftung, which estimates that India's GDP could grow by 1.3% annually because of the EU-India FTA. So I think at the end of the day, if India becomes more competitive, it'll help both India and the EU economically, but it'll also impact the balance of power in Asia, which, of course, will help in furthering their strategic interests. So trade is one of the building blocks of the relationship, and an expansion of that through the FTA, I think, would really go a long way. Just the last slide, please. I won't go into this because I'm running out of time, but these are just some pointers for the way ahead in the relationship. All in all, things are looking really positive for the future of the EU-India partnership. You can take a screenshot of this slide. And thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions, comments from you all during the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shairee, again for a wonderful presentation on the India-EU relationship. I was also involved, 5 years ago in building the EU-India partnership with 11 funding councils of Europe with the Indian Council for Social Science Research, because in social sciences, the EU really believes that India is a place, where a lot of experimentation can take place and we can really understand and move forward, because issues of migration, issues of inequalities, you name it, and those issues are here. But not only the socio-economic issues, but as you rightly said, that as a balancer, India is being increasingly looked forward to, and also in maintaining harmony within the multilateralism, multilateral institutions, which are at threat after 75 years. And Prime Minister Modi's statement also yesterday shows that how we need to save, these institutions, how we need the World Health Organization even more at such a time, and the US walking out and not funding. So I think in that context also EU-India relations become extremely, extremely important. So very, very important insights brought by you. We'll move on to the last presentation of the day. Again, a very important topic being discussed by Dr. Anjali Sehrawat, Assistant Professor and Program Director of Uncial University. So one of the leading private universities in the country. The geostrategic significance of Central Asia is what you'll be speaking about. So we are looking forward to your presentation.
A very good afternoon, ma'am.
Thank you. Yeah.
As you've already given my small introduction, I would like to introduce myself again. I'm Dr. Anjali Sehrawat. I teach politics to law students at Uncial University, and I also happen to be the program director of BLLB Honours Program. Ma'am, I hope you remember me.
Yes.
You were there as my external panelist in my PhD Viva.
Oh,
along with Dr. Moderator. I'm Dr. Moderator Dutta's
student. Okay, wonderful. Yes.
And that was, I think, 2 years back.
That's right.
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful to see you. Yeah.
So, ma'am, good to be connected on this platform again with you. So, ma'am, I have been hearing all the papers, and we've had like really wonderful presentations for the day. For this particular session, and I hope I'm able to match up to all of them. So I will start with Central Asia and the importance of Central Asia. As you mentioned that my topic is geopolitical significance of Central Asia, and then we've been speaking about South Asia and the adjacent regions. So Central Asia is also not that far from South Asian region. So what is Central Asia? So as we all know, that collapse of Soviet Union led to formation of new independent republics, Baltics, and Central Asian, and the creation of Russian Federation. So Central Asian region constitute 5 countries: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. And depending on different interpretations, the neighboring countries are also sometimes considered part of the region. For example, Afghanistan. So each of these states had been conquered by Imperial Russia and subsequently was tightly controlled by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic before 1991. So the process of establishing themselves as truly autonomous states has been central enterprise for these countries. And the importance of this region cannot be denied, as you know that they were the one where we had Silk Road, and that connected Muslim lands with the people of Europe, South Asia, and East Asia. Thus, the revival of Silk Route makes this region again a significant area of interest on the world map. So, ma'am, let me define how. Let me just give a broad idea. How am I going to go about this paper? So, as I'm mentioning that, I will be talking about the geostrategic importance. I will be talking about the big players and their interest in this region, and why is this region politically or strategically or geographically so important on the world map. So I will be touching upon Russia, China, India, and if time permits, I will also give an overview about India's interest in Central Asia. So, ma'am, its geopolitical location is at the crossroads of Eurasia, and it's a landlocked location, puts it at the heart of Eurasia, neighboring regional powers, Russia to the north, China to the east, and in close proximity and with other potential regional powers, Iran to the south, India to the southeast, however, also surrounded by regions of South Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Europe. So its central location has meant that Central Asia has often been an important aspect of all powerful empires, which we've seen. And Central Asia has always been a center of great powers' interest throughout history because of its geographical extent, strategic location, ethnic diversity, and conflict potential for the same reason. We know that Russia and British empires played their great game throughout the 19th century, where the Soviet Russia had the supremacy, and region's importance was revived after the disintegration of USSR in 1991 with the liberation of these states. And emergence of Central Asia region and discovery of huge quantity of energy resources in this region has led to a new great game competing between regional and extra-regional powers. And also we see that after 9/11, Central Asian regions gained huge importance because of both Russia and US endowing them with the varied political, economic, and security concessions. US intervention in Afghanistan and Iraq indicated of her designs or her desires and interest in the Central Asian region, which has had great implications for the regional countries. Russia is also not wanting to leave its strong foothold in the region and is cantankerous with the US presence in the region. Strategic location and influence of Central Asia on neighboring region, mainly on Indian subcontinent, has made it the center of extra-regional powers. So due to their common borders and geographical closeness to Afghanistan, Central Asian republics became out as frontline in the US war on terrorism and Islamic extremism. During the military phase of US-led war against terrorism in Afghanistan, the Central Asian countries played a very active role. All except Turkmenistan had provided their air bases to US and its elite forces. Another significant shift is the present geopolitical chess game in Central Asia, referred to as Great Anti-Terrorist Game, which is very different from the one which we have seen in the previous, I would say, century. So in this current anti-terrorist game, along with Russia, US, and they both are acting as dominant player because of its military presence in the region. US military action against Taliban regime created a historical shift from the Cold War. The West against USSR to the new global issue, the industrialized North against radical political Islam. In the early 2020, America and Taliban all have signed an agreement for bringing peace for Afghanistan. For America, if that happens, that is going to put an end to the 18 years of its intervention in Afghanistan. So besides that, we know that all of the sudden Central Asia is so important to China as well, and various countries are wanting to have trade with it. Why? And then, as I've already mentioned in my introduction, that it is rich in natural resources. So let me just highlight like what kind of natural resources is it rich in, what is the potential, what of this region. So hydrocarbon energy resources of the Central Asians are estimated to be about 7 to 8% of the world. And as opined by political scientist Ariel Cohen, overall possible deposits of oil of the CAS should be 170.5 billion barrels and 15.3 trillion cubic meters of natural gas. And among the 5 Central Asian states, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan are endowed with oil and gas resources. Kazakhstan's oil reserves are estimated to be about 92 billion barrels, and that of Turkmenistan of about, say, 80 billion barrels. primarily the Caspian region. Uzbekistan has huge reserves of natural gas. So Central Asian states gave priority to energy sector as part of economic development, and more importantly for exporting oil and much needed hard currency as a major source for income for them. So Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan to some extent, so Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan and to some extent Uzbekistan have succeeded in their objective in this regard. So both, and when I talk about the leftover countries, the Tajikistan and Kyrgyz Republic, they have constraints, stores of oil and gas in sums, and that have not justified much consideration from outside financial foreign investors. Russia has, oil giants, Gazprom, Lukoil, Rosneft, who have made huge energy investment, who have made investment in energy sector of Central Asian states competing with Western firms. China, if I take up country wise, so China has maintained its relation with Central Asian region, and obviously it shares its border with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and its activities are centered on, earlier its activities were centered on political and diplomatic dealings to resolve the disputed border issues in Soviet times. Now China's economic and security interest in the region today cannot be overlooked. China has ambitious Belt and Road Initiative with colossal infrastructure investments aiming to improve trade connectivity, making Central Asian region vital for it. China has cemented ties for fighting against, to fight against ethnic separatism and religious extremism. China is coming out as an important player in unfolding of this new great game in landlocked region due to its locational advantage. As I said that, that's one country along with Russia which shares its border with this region. So China has announced, as just now mentioned, its highly ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. That is an attempt to harness maximum mineral and hydrocarbon abundance and to find market for its goods. It's a new way of China's soft power manifestation of its multilateral rise and its involvement, and it involves investment in infrastructure and development in 152 countries of the world. China plays an important role in the region, mainly in terms of infrastructure development and trade too. So America's interest, I've already said that, I've already mentioned that for America, it's strategically very important because this region is in close proximity with Afghanistan. But China is also interested in energy resources of this particular region. And as I've already mentioned that this region is rich in oil, gas, coal, uranium, the exploitation of this resource is not yet fully done. So these countries are also showing signs of resource curse, under which the nations rich in energy resources develop unstable and disturbed economies. Their geography and longest association with Russia has made them dependent on Russia for its most energy export transportation. So as I have mentioned that Central Asia didn't hold any importance for Americans until 9/11. For them, it was part of Russia until Cold War. So these two superpowers were more engaged in the region only post 9/11. So the region became part of US diplomatic strategy only post their independence with the rediscovery of energy resources in this region surrounding Caspian Sea. So US is seeing Central Asia as an alternate to energy supply only after disintegration of USSR. And it's important for US also to have diversification of energy resources. US policymakers and alike are evaluating how energy issues fit into wider US strategic benefits in this region. And US remains the second largest consumer of energy in the year 2017 after China. So for meeting its energy demands, US definitely cannot overlook this region. US has an opportunity to use this not so explored region for energy assets to form the political chessboard by methods unforeseen till recently. And China and Russia are also licensing to reduce US influence in the region, and as they accrue more Central Asian energy assets, they will inhibit US infringement into their alleged spheres of influence. And I've already mentioned, if time allows, I can elaborate on Russia's interest in Central Asia, though mentioned earlier. Ma'am, if you permit so.
Please conclude because we are running out of time and we should have some time for question and answers.
Okay, ma'am. So I would conclude here, not taking much of your time, as I've mentioned a bit about all the countries. So this energy-rich region, but not so easily accessible region, is hindered by much political upheavals and geographical settings, besides continued Russia's influence and limited access to waterways and inadequate export infrastructure. But these reasons do not limit its geopolitical and geoeconomic importance. So in the end, I would just, sum it up in a line or two that revival of Silk Route makes this region again a significant area of interest on the world map. Not only to Russia, because it has been a part of Russia till 1991, not only to America, because it has its strategical interest in the region due to Afghanistan. It has had its air bases to control that region, to have its interference in Afghanistan region, and not restricting to China, but also to South Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anjali. Yeah,
that's okay,
Central Asia.
Thank you. Yeah,
Central Asia is important also for its mineral resources, and with the oil prices having gone down to between $20 to $30 a barrel, obviously the fortunes of these countries dependent on oil have also been greatly impacted adversely. So now I thank all the panelists. We had 7 wonderful presentations, very brilliant expositions of the subject involved, and of course it's a wide range of subjects, but I will now open the floor for Q&A. I'm sure you're all waiting to ask questions. Please state your name. You could switch on your video to ask your question, but be very pointed and do let us know whom you want to ask the question to. So who the question is directed to.
Reena, Bhaskar Gupta here.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
my
we
question
can.
is to Arushi.
Yes.
I don't know whether it's a comment or a question. Arushi, the basic tenets of armed forces says that they're not supposed to do disaster relief or disaster management, because they are meant for a different cause, that is protection of the borders. Yet, HADR has been given specifically and as part of their mandate by the government, and they have accepted it. I think you should know why. If you don't know, then I can elaborate. But this is very important, that why armed forces have been given HADR operations as part of their mandate and not the NDRF. In our country, it's the NDRF which is mandated for disaster relief. Armed forces build up on them. But in this case, armed forces have been given the mandate and anybody else will build up on the armed forces. And the next comment I want to give, ma'am, is very simple, that all these problems that India is facing is because dominance of Asia will be the dominance of the world tomorrow. It is the pivot of the world today, and not Europe anymore, not US anymore. And China doesn't want India to be there. It's like, if you see the kahawat in Hindi, ek myan mein ek hi talwar hai sakti hai, so China doesn't want India. Everything else revolves around that. Thank you.
Very true. So it's a China-led world order which they are trying to establish, if not by 2021, certainly by 2049, because those are the 2 centennial goals, for the Chinese Communist Party.
They have their 50-year plans.
Yes, because they always have long-term and, very visionary kind of strategies for the region, for the world. And so they are even building their own institutions, They started with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and increasing
and the truth is,
funding.
Whoever dominates Asia will dominate the world tomorrow.
Yes, increasing funding to WHO, even as the United States, sort of backs off. So we are seeing certainly a tilt towards this. Any other question? Thank you so much.
If I could comment, ma'am, if I could comment a bit.
Yes, Arushi, yes, you would like to. Okay, please respond.
Sir, with the rise of Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. Sir, with the rise of violent this total pivot of warfare, we can say, we are going towards AI, artificial intelligence, quantum computing. The role of armed forces has to change and evolve. So I think this is a good direction. More involvement in HADR activities. This will create goodwill. And more importantly, we have to change and evolve with the times. For example, I don't know if you remember, but during the 2012 presidential campaign, Mitt Romney pointed out that they had less submarines, and Barack Obama replied that they also have less bayonets and horses. As we change and evolve, we have to also change our functions, because the world is changing. Not just say the armed forces are for defense at the borders. Even the borders, drone technology and everything changing with this cyberspace expanding, just it has to change. Thank you, sir.
Any other question to any of our speakers about India, Nepal, about ASEAN, Central Asia, about India, EU, sub-regionalism? Yes, nobody wants to talk about the issues on the South China Sea. Dr. Sampa, ASEAN, what do you think after a very, very long time, Vietnam has, in the summit meeting, as you said, in the 36th virtual summit that was held, Vietnam did give a befitting response, and they said that, we want a rules-based order. Yes. And the United States has also very recently given a very sharp response to that China's 9-9 is not recognized, in which they are bringing in the Spratly Islands, the Paracel Islands, and of course the way they have constructed all the military facilities on the various reefs and shoals. Woody Island, which is near Hainan, and their submarines. And you see the Nimitz and Ronald Reagan, the aircraft states in the South China. So any responses?
My question is not answered as yet.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, Sampa.
Okay, ma'am, I don't know, but somehow my video stopped working after my presentation. But anyway, I hope I'm audible to all of you. So yes. Yeah, ma'am, I completely agree with you that the recent developments in South China Sea are worrying. If we look at the current international relations scenario, no country in the region in Southeast Asia, except I think Cambodia and to some extent probably Laos and Brunei. Most of the ASEAN countries, they have expressed their concerns over the South China Sea developments. Vietnam has always been very vocal against, the Chinese assertiveness on South China Sea. Recently, Indonesia and Malaysia, they have also expressed their concerns. Singapore, which was considered to be a so-called neutral country because Singapore doesn't have a direct stake in the South China Sea issue, but recently it has also expressed concerns over it. Maybe, in the recent times, the way India has also looked at these developments through the developments in Quad and all, the Indo-Pacific approach. So all these things, we need to have a close look at all these developments, how things are getting unfolded. So let's see how things, are getting unfolding in the recent future. So I'm looking forward to these developments, as you rightly mentioned. And yes, I think one way of looking at it from the Indian perspective would be developing more and more, defense and security cooperation with the Southeast Asian countries, especially countries like Vietnam. So that is already underway, under process. So more defense and security cooperation would be beneficial for India to build an image in Southeast Asia, when India is India is looking at having more stakes in the entire region of Indo-Pacific. And it will also benefit the Southeast Asian countries because they are also looking at an alternative power. So yeah, these developments are important.
So there is one question in the chat box about the India-Nepal border. So the border issue. So would our speaker on Nepal, would you like to respond to that? Is there a possibility for a peaceful settlement of the India-Nepal border, considering that people's mobility has also been impacted, you know? Move around, it's more or less an open border in some parts, so they move around quite freely near Gorakhpur and other areas in Bihar. Yes? So you think it has to be settled, of course, diplomatically, and we should restrict the media for making any kinds of adverse remarks on the situation, which can only further make things tense between the neighbors. Because neighbors, you know, you cannot choose. Neighbors are given to you, and you have to continue to manage your relations with your neighbors. And that is why IK Gujral had also the neighborhood first policy, you know. So it's very important not only to know your neighbor well, but also to understand that neighbors are always more sensitive. So you have to keep the sensitivities of the people, because there is such a lot of engagement of people from both the sides, you know, and they have never seen a border really. Even in fact on our western border with Pakistan near Rajasthan, we find that there is a lot of, you know, intermingling with some communities there. But when you look at it from Delhi, the situation is very different. So when it comes to people who are living at the borders, the situation is quite in contrast to that. Yeah. So anybody else have any? Yes.
I would like to
Yes,
add, ma'am. Definitely, I would agree that sensitivity should be there in the media, definitely. But one could never argue a case for any kind of restrictions on media or whatever on either side of the border, either internally or externally. That should not be there. But definitely the media has to act in a responsible manner no matter what, because the basic dignity and respect as we give to any other person has to be given more so to our neighbors. Yeah, that's it, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, democracies, you know, are being called to test. In Southeast Asia also, we are seeing more and more authoritarian regimes taking over, you know, from Thailand, and Myanmar is going into elections soon. Singapore just had concluded with their elections, and, you know, the same prime minister has been reinstated, but with lesser majority this time. So we are seeing a lot of authoritarian regimes, but then you can see what happened in China with the pandemic. I was there in China actually in November. I came back mid-November, and I believe the first case was discovered on 1st of December. But by the time that, you know, it was really out to the WHO, it was in January. And a lot of, you know, troubleshooters had been silenced. A lot of people had been silenced, and even though the top authorities were aware of it. So that is why that entire trust deficit with China for the world has increased because of that. But if had it been in a democratic setting, I don't think that would have been possible. So, you know, any pandemic, you know, if it had been known to the world very fast because of the people. Yes, anybody?
Ma'am, if I have your permission, I'd like to comment on the border issue as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Rushali. Yes.
Yes. Ma'am, I think personally the current Lipulek dispute is definitely one of a major lows in our ties with Nepal, but I am fairly confident, as evident from the statements from diplomatic sides on both diplomatic officials on both sides, that it will resolve through diplomatic resolution. But I think it's more important to recognize the underlying structural factors. Why is this happening? So the timing is obviously quite suspicious. So because in our previous week, we always had the issue with borders, but they've always been resolved through diplomatic moves. But what we're seeing now is a fallout even at the societal level. There is a lot of backlash from the local people in Nepal. And that also has a lot to do with the neglect I feel that India has given to this region, where the region is becoming important only when it is getting inflamed. And I think that approach should change. So as far as the border issue is concerned, I'm pretty sure that diplomatic resolution will take place. But I think fundamentally what we need to reassess is how we're looking at the region and how we're looking at Nepal as a partner. And hello?
Right.
Am I audible?
Yeah, thank you. Who wants to come in? Tamanna? Anybody wants to ask a question?
Madam, I would like to ask a question to Anjali, if I can.
Yes.
Anjali, you spoke about Central Asia. Is Anjali there? I don't see her.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, okay. So, we've heard recently that Iran has supposedly dropped India from the Chabahar project, and this project was supposed to be an alternative route connecting India to Afghanistan and further on to Central Asia, right? So I wanted to ask you, what are the implications of this, on India-Central Asia relations now? What do you think will happen?
As you've mentioned that there was recently in the news that India has been dropped from that project. So certainly I've not really read any development thereafter. But then India has been trying to collaborate with Central Asia on cultural terms. Like, for example, I've mentioned in my presentation, but then I was not able to elaborate on that. There is a Connect Central Asian policy, and there is India-Central Asian dialogue, which was held way long back. But then India is continuing with its Connect Central Asian policy, and then it's trying to connect with Asia on various other aspects. As you know that we have common problems also, radical Islam, extremism, drug trafficking. So when it comes to connectivity via infrastructure, or that we are not going to be having direct connectivity in terms of transportation with Central Asia, obviously it will have negative implication on the relationship which they will be sharing in future, because India will have to certainly think of other ways. As you might be knowing about TAPI also, the TAPI pipeline. So that is also on somewhere on hold, because until we have good relationship with Afghan Pakistan, so that is also not possible for us to have that Turkmenistan, Afghan, Pakistan, India pipeline. So certainly we need to have better connectivity in terms of transportation, to have better trade and better relationship with Central Asia. But then otherwise India is collaborating in on other aspects. So, but then connectivity, as we know, is important for trade and other, exchange.
Thank you so much.
And ma'am, may I add, this news has already been refuted. There's a fake news about India having been dropped. There's a statement from the Iran Foreign Affairs spokesman that this is not the correct news.
Thank you for your input, sir, because even I have not followed it up, but then recently it was there in the news that it has been dropped. Yes.
Ma'am, in the comment section, sir asked a question about why are the armed forces tasked with HADR activities. So, ma'am, when humanitarian crises occur and when there are natural disasters, the terrain is very difficult to navigate. There is infrastructure damage, and there are basically the area is very unstable and problematic. Moreover, violent non-state actors can enter these regions. So the armed forces, they have the training, the temperament, and the governmental resources to be able to deal with these crises in an effective manner. So, ma'am, and provide it in a timely. Moreover, they're also familiar with transportation and other kinds of requirements on a very tight schedule and in a very restrained manner. Because if someone from, for example, an NGO has to provide the same amount of aid in such a short amount of time, and they have to go in such a dangerous area they may not have the domain knowledge or the training or basically the temperament to deal with such issues. For example, if someone has to go into Sudan or in Libya, for example, to provide aid, they do not have the training, they do not understand the politics on the ground, or they do not have the government resources or even the government mandates. So this is really problematic. And the armed forces, they are able to deal with these problems in just a more comprehensive manner. For example, the French forces in Sahel, they are better. Alliance have been involved in Sahel for a long period of time.
Sorry, Arushi, we are running late and we have been asked by the organizers to conclude. So once again, thank you all for your presentations, your inputs, for participating in the discussions and for making it a truly very vibrant session. Thank you to NICE, Dr. Jaiswal, for organizing this wonderful Women's International Summit. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marwah, for sparing us your precious time and joining us here today. We would also like to extend our gratitude to all the paper presenters as well as the audiences for making this session productive with your questions. And we will soon have a recorded version of this summit in our YouTube channel. You can also catch us there. Also, do join us at our next session. And once again, many thanks to all of you and have a wonderful day. Thank you.